This morning, the United States, Iran, and Oman are closing in on an interim agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, with the U.S. aiming for announcement today. That's according to two regional sources and a U.S. official. The deal under discussion sets up a 60-day temporary arrangement between Oman and Iran in the strait, which could be extended. All inbound ship traffic would use a northern lane through Iranian waters, while all outbound traffic would use a southern lane through Omani waters in coordination with Iran. No tolls or fees would be charged during that 60-day period. A senior Middle East diplomat with direct knowledge of the talks tells MS Now the United States and Europe are placing a great deal of pressure on Oman to accept the agreement. The diplomat adds the deal is poised to give Iran temporary control of both routes in the strait, which would be a major concession, as the outbound route would through Omani territorial waters still includes a section of Iranian water. This all comes as Reuters reports the U.S. has used virtually all of its long-range precision missiles throughout the war, now in its 6 months. That's according to sources familiar with Pentagon data. As the news outlet puts it, the dramatic rundown of these missiles means President Trump may have to rely more on riskier piloted bombing missions if he relaunches large-scale attacks on Iran. President Trump hit back at that reporting, writing in part, "We have far more munitions than anyone in the world, and far more than we need."
I think we need to look at the exit polls. We have to have the race called to kind of really understand what happened here. The most interesting piece of this to me so far is if you look at Wayne County, Michigan, which is home to both Dearborn and Detroit, that is has lots of black voters, minority voters, Arab voters, and it went for Stevens, but narrowly. And so what's interesting about that to me is you have to take into effect in this race, people are divided, the Democratic Party is divided, and even black voters, the jury is out on progressives. And also the amount of money that was spent in this race, specifically on behalf of Stevens, clearly played a role, because there was over $50 million in attack ads on Syed, tying him to attacks on Michelle Obama that he really didn't make in the way that they were insinuating. Also insinuating that Haley Stevens was endorsed by Obama, which was not the case. He didn't get involved in this race. All this is to say it's very clear that black voters were deluged, including members of my family who live in the state, with attack ads. And so all of that played a role. At the end of the day, though, it's obvious, and when you look at your reporting, Peter, it is very clear that voters in Michigan, just like in Brooklyn, are looking for fighters. They're looking for outside candidates. And I do think that Abdul was helped by a trend in the Democratic Party, just an anger toward the establishment. And Abdul has been angry about the Democratic establishment since we were in college at Michigan together. So, whether you dislike him, whether you like him, that is an authentic position that he has taken for about 20 years.
This sounds a lot like the memorandum of understanding that we saw back in June, which created this 60-day ceasefire. The Strait of Hormuz was supposed to be open once again, but really why that deal blew up was that Iran was having issues with commercial vessels passing through the Omani side of the strait and not the Iranian side of the strait. And that's why they were shooting drones at those vessels, because they wanted them to pass on the Iranian side. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio has maintained numerous times that if we allowed Iran to have any control of the strait, that would create a very dangerous precedent for other waterways around the world. So it seems like this is a major concession, that Iran would have any control of what's happening in the strait there. And I think what remains to be seen is how this is really going to play out, because clearly it didn't work that well the last time around. But I think that Reuters reporting that you just highlighted is really, a key point here. We are dramatically low when you look at stockpiles, regardless of what the administration tells us. The last check I saw, we have 234 THAAD missiles left and 759 Patriots. And that's creating these windows of vulnerability around the world. So not only if we had to continue airstrikes on Iran, are we going to have to, do it in a more dangerous way, as they pointed out, with these piloted missions munitions, which could lead to more American troops dying. But also, if you look at other regions of the world.
This morning, Iranian state media is casting doubt on President Trump's claim that the Strait of Hormuz would be opening soon. Here's what the president said last night.
Iran, as an example, will never have a nuclear weapon. They already can't, but it's going to be formal. The strait's going to be open very soon, or they're going to get hit very hard, and then the strait's going to be open.
Iran says it is continuing negotiations with Oman over safe shipping routes through the strait, but that there is no connection between those talks and the strait reopening. Meanwhile, sources are telling CNN that the U.S. military has burned through nearly 80% of its inceptors for a key missile defense system, and senior U.S. military commanders are warning that the Pentagon's munitions stockpile is dangerously low. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, though, calling the reporting, quote, not true. If indeed nearly 80% of THAAD and half of our Patriot missile stock is gone since the Iran war began, how would you describe that? What does that mean?
Dangerous, in one word. And it's not only dangerous in the context of the Middle East, Sarah. It's dangerous in the context of Ukraine and dangerous in the context of Taiwan. Let me explain. What we're talking about here, and you're showing a picture of some of these ground-to-air defense missiles that go up and shoot down incoming ballistic missiles, drones, cruise missiles even. And if it is true, and you have to factor into this the denials from the Pentagon that are coming out, but if it's true that we're down 80%, we will be unable to fully help our allies in the Gulf, the Arab countries, and Israel defend themselves. We will be unable to provide any air defense interceptors to Ukraine, which will mean their war against Russia will go less well. And we will not have interceptors available to deter China. So bottom line, if this is true, these numbers, it's dangerous. And I know the combatant commanders around the world, which I used to be both in Europe and in Latin America, are very concerned.
In general, the New York Times is pointing out that the president keeps making these threats and the world has stopped flinching. Do you agree with that? And if so, what does that mean for our credibility, for national security, even for our position in terms of world order?
Yeah, I think the Iranian leadership has now discounted much of which is coming out of Washington. This dialogue out of Mr. Trump is more aimed at the U.S. population than Iranians. I think in private, we're desperate to get an agreement of any sort. I think we've now devalued the whole notion of getting control of Iranian nuclear weapons production, the 10 tons of fissile material that are allegedly buried underground at 2 or possibly 3 sites in Iran. So I think the outcome of this war is likely to be a strategic disaster for the United States, in which our efforts did not result in getting weapons inspectors back on the ground or denying the Iranians control of the Straits of Hormuz.
When we extend, our numbers on visas, because all that does is once again put a Band-Aid on it. If we're looking to grow our economy, then we need to look at making more permanent solutions on this. We got to get labor involved. We got to get industry involved. And we got to fill out where the holes are created, because this narrative that it steals American jobs is true in some industries. It's not true for all industries.
Those comments from DHS Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen over the weekend, sitting next to Oklahoma Governor Stitt there, have drawn quite a bit of anger from some in the MAGAsphere. Conservative personalities like Laura Loomer and Steve Bannon see his comments as a departure from the Trump administration's mass deportation policy, and now they're calling for Mullen to be replaced. That was quick. Joining us, Mark McKinnon is back, in the hot seat. Major MAGA players are now turning on Mullen. Steve Bannon said, quote, MAGA wants President Trump to detail Pitbull Pulte to DHS. Mullen is the wrong guy at the wrong time for the wrong job at a time when we need to focus on mass deportations. We get an amnesty advocate. That's such a stretch, but we know that the president tends to move on the last voice in his ear. Is that Steve Bannon? Is Mullen in jeopardy here?
Well, this is exactly why Trump's ratings on immigration have turned upside down. And whoever thought that signature issue, which was the first one that he talked about coming down the elevator back in 2015, now he'd be unpopular on the issue of immigration. People have a more unfavorable opinion of his immigration policies than they do favorable, including a lot of Republicans, because the reality is that what people really wanted was just a policy that stopped the bad guys from coming in. It wasn't a policy that kept good people from coming in or legally. And this is astonishing because all Mullen said was he was talking about a legal policy. So now people like Bannon and others don't even want legal immigrants. And then they go into this crazy replacement theory that behind their rationale for not wanting even legal immigrants is that they have this notion that they're all going to vote Democratic. And then they go into this crazy idea called replacement theory, that this is all some grand scheme to just take over the American electorate through immigration.
Yeah, and there were whispers about how, the MAGA sphere didn't like that Markwayne Mullin seemed to be chummy or at least friendly in some way, shape, or form with Governor Wes Moore and other Democrats that were at that conference. But alas, Mullin has kept deportation numbers relatively steady compared to his predecessor, Kristi Noem. That's according to reporting from Politico. MAGA's clearly unhappy here. They're distressed, but Pulte would surely face a very uphill battle when it comes to Senate Republicans who didn't even want to see him as DNI. So would this be the same fight all over again?
It would be. And, listen, I think that the reality is that Mullin is doing, a pretty good job based on what Trump actually wants him to do. You mentioned the deportation numbers, which are never going to be as high as Stephen Miller wants them to be, but they're always going to be higher than the American public wants them to be. I mean, again, this goes to the issue of, what Americans really want. And again, they want to keep the bad guys from coming in, not throwing good guys out. And, I live near Breckenridge, Colorado. Imagine that community where you have, ICE agents coming in and going into schools looking for, the violators of immigration policy to throw out of the country. And that's just not what people voted for or what they really want. So, listen, at the end of the day, Mullin is, for most people, far too close to Trump and exercising way too many of his policies, but it's never going to be enough for Steve Bannon.
Yeah, even some Republicans don't like the images that they have seen, the ones that you have described. And there is that debate about whether Mullin has had a softer touch or not when the numbers are virtually the same.
I was talking to a very right-wing person, a MAGA person, earlier today in prep for this. And what they said to me was he sounded like a Democrat in that speech at the National Governors Association conference. I don't know if that's quite how I would put it, but he definitely sounded like more of the old school Republicans who feel like immigration does provide a service to the country. And then when he got eaten up as quickly as he did, and they started saying, folks like Steve Bannon saying they want Bill Pulte to go from his weird jobs now to taking over GHS, that is, you see this new message. I think the thing that's really important here is that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's running DHS. Those decisions are being made in the White House by Stephen Miller and Donald Trump.
Right. I mean, you are right that he doesn't quite sound like a Democrat. What he sounds like is John Cornyn when the Gang of Eight was putting together their immigration deal, what is now almost 20 years ago, and it was just about being honest about the economic reality of what this country needed when it came to workers. Steve Bannon did not agree with that assessment. He told Politico, quote, MAGA wants President Trump to detail Pitbull Pulte to DHS. Mullin is the wrong guy at the wrong time for the wrong job, a time when we need focus on, quote, mass deportations. We get an amnesty advocate.
It's Wednesday, 5 August, year of our Lord 2026. We're waiting for the Hormuz deal. Of course, the Daily Telegraph of London seems to have a detailed analysis of that. I'm not so sure if we're in the deal. The deal's not between Oman and the pirates in Persia. We'll get into that. Also, artificial intelligence executive order. Rumor has it it's not going to be disclosed. We'll deal with that also. In Texas, Governor Abbott just declares a moratorium on data centers until analysis is done about the electric grid. And of course, the key issues that drive MAGA to the polls. I don't know. Not that important for the White House staff. They think they have a better way. Steve Cortes is next. We're going to talk all about this in a breakdown. John Solomon's going to join us. Blockbuster news on Comey and the corrupt FBI. I guess now, after Solomon puts this report out, half the FBI will be leaving the building. Maybe. Government gangsters arrested today. All next in the War Room.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, huge news out of Texas. If you talk to folks out in the field, particularly like in Michigan, the data centers are in Ohio. Data centers. These are huge topics. We got to get on the right side of these. Or you're going to lose the House, folks. Senate, Michigan. I don't know. Radical Marxist jihadist Cortes. We've warned about this for a long time. The Marxist jihadist, radical, no borders, no ICE, none of it won. Although I think the good news coming out of this is that the blue collar members of the Democratic Party that have not joined MAGA, like Macomb County, and even in Detroit, Wayne County, backed backed what I would call the progressives. The centrist over there are super progressives, but the Muslim is a Marxist jihadist. So I think there's some good news there, particularly for Rogers if he can focus. And the other day, Semaphore had a really good story where he's focused on local issues. And his campaign will tell you data centers are like the tip of the spear. Texas, for Abbott to call for a moratorium until the current data centers, a full report and analysis of what they're going to do for the grid. Working class people and middle class people just had it. They don't like the oligarchs. Yeah. They don't like the forced phony legal immigration deals. They hate H-1B visas. They hate it. And so to try to moderate Trump, how about this? Let Trump be Trump, Steve Cortes.
Amen. And let's hear no more from Kevin Hassett on the White House lawn telling us how great data centers are, okay? Because if even Greg Abbott, who's not exactly one of us, not exactly hardcore patriotic populist, even he is now seeing the reality. Look, Abbott normally takes his directions from AT&T and Dell. He does what big tech says. He does what the Austin tech crowd tells him to. So even he is seeing the light here and getting religion on data centers, because you're right, the America First movement, and by the way, we're joined in this by a lot of the folks on the left. We are not going to accept data centers as presently put in front of the American people, meaning we're going to just stuff you, screw you and your electric bill and your electric grid. We're going to use your water. Oh, and by the way, we're going to ruin some of the most pristine natural areas in America to do it. And you're just going to take it. And our spokesman, Kevin O'Leary, is going to come on air, Mr. Wonderful, and brag about his $2 million watch and tell the good people of Michigan and Ohio and Utah, too bad, we're putting a massive center in and you have no say about it. Well, we do have a say, of course. And most of this, you're right, is at the local level. This is a hot issue, Steve. I find this in my polling and focus groups. I think anybody who gets on the ground in these places and talks to people, you want to get people fired up. It's data centers. And I would also point this out, Steve, in terms of connecting the dots. These are the same players as immigration. What I mean by that is the same oligarchs, the same corporate CEOs and multinational behemoths, the same ones that want a constant flow of free labor into this country, that constantly push for open borders and porous borders. These are the same forces pushing for these data centers without regard to local interests. I'm not saying we can't have data centers, but I'm saying you got to do it in making a bargain with local interests. Don't put them in places that are irreplaceable in terms of their vistas and their natural environments. I would argue most of these, getting back to Michigan, they should be going in depressed urban areas. Why are these data centers not going into Detroit? They can go there where they are very much needed and can provide a boost. But even there, again, you've got to make a deal with the people of Detroit. And this hubris from big tech is no longer going to fly. And you're right, it is a hot point political issue for every race in 2026. And Republicans better be on the right side of this, on the correct side of this.
Got to be on the right side of this. Also, O'Leary and all these phony guys in big tech. Oh, these guys are CCP spokesmen. Screw you. We're the anti-CCP movement. You guys are putting the CCP's not even in the game in artificial intelligence unless you got them in the universities. You got Chinese nationals in the labs. You got them all over the place. You're financing it. You're selling them chips. Wong's looking the other way while the black market's going through, I think it's Thailand now and Malaysia. The thing is sick. We're financing and building the Chinese Communist Party's involvement in the ecosystem of AI. Talk to me. Connect the dot of immigration and the mass asylum and all this to the Marxist jihadists winning in Detroit, the heartland of the industrial heartland of the nation, sir. What's the connection there?
Well, look, the connection is, these folks, these Marxist jihadis, they claim, like Mamdani and like El Sayed, they claim to represent working class people. Now, of course, we know that's a ridiculous farce. It's a complete ruse. We also know that their primary support base, these are not working class people. These are actually over-credentialed people who have largely been disappointed in life because they got a lot of degrees and now they make very little money, at least compared to what they think they should be making. So these are the credentialed, pampered, ruling class wannabes who are primarily their followers. But this is the important point. Where we catch them effectively, where we expose them and unveil them is through immigration. Because if you are for working class people, at least if you claim to be for working class people, and then simultaneously you advocate for open borders, you are a complete fraud. Because we know that open borders have been one of the key factors, perhaps the key driver at undermining the wages of working class Americans in this country. Steve, I often say that if these illegals who poured across the border under Biden's era, if they were replacing private equity executives and media, TV and media hosts and attorneys in this country, that border would have been hermetically sealed in a nanosecond. But the fact is they were replacing working class Americans. And so this, again, is where we get Abdayul and where we expose him for whom he really is. They are, of course, in favor of the most radical policies of the Democrat Party on immigration. And by the way, let me make this point too. There's a lot of sort of debate out there. Has the Democratic Party been taken over by the DSA? The Democrat Party is the DSA, maybe not the voter level, and that's what the voters of Michigan showed us last night. There are still sensible Democrat voters. I mean, fewer and fewer, of course, as time goes on. And perhaps these candidates like El Sayed will push them hopefully back into our movement. However, at the decision maker level, meaning the party operatives, the office holders, the biggest donors, the Democrat Party is the DSA, and my proof of that is immigration. Look at Joe Biden, who was supposedly the moderate Democrat. They tried to call him Lunch Bucket Joe. Okay, well, what did Lunch Bucket Joe do? Probably the most single radical move in all of American history by a United States president. He threw open the door of the U.S. border, inviting in tens of millions of illegals who came here to do what? To compete illegally against American workers in the wage market. I can't think of anything more anti-worker. And so given that reality, and given that Donald Trump now has thankfully closed the border, the primary selling point, the primary value add that we have for voters into November in Michigan, all over the country, but let's talk specifically about Michigan, is going to be on immigration. That El Sayed will throw that border back open, and that Mike Rogers will support the sensible policies of immigration control. We would go even further, Steve, you and I, all the way to immigration restriction.
Well, Abdul wants to abandon ICE, no interior enforcement whatsoever. Also, Markwayne Mullin, because they get up on these panels and they essentially support the radical Democrat position. He's sitting there bragging about how these phony immigration plans like H-1B visas and all this, the phony immigration plans. Oh, we let in 900,000 or 1 million last year. That was more than we got out of the country. That's not a selling point, right? Somehow he doesn't quite get the heart of the matter, sir.
No, to say the least, he does not. Bragging about 1 million legal immigrants into this country. And by the way, that doesn't count all of the H-1Bs and the OPTs for young people. You talk to any young person right now, somebody who's recently graduated, there's a good chance that they either don't have a job or they have a job that's far below what they had hoped to get coming out of university, especially if they have expensive degrees or even graduate degrees. And I'm talking about kids with useless degrees. People with STEM degrees can't get jobs because of OPT and H-1B combined with the almost 1 million legal migrants. So for Secretary Mullin, somebody who should be an absolute attack dog. Okay, we should have somebody who is a fierce fighter in that position right now at this moment in time. And instead, we have an accommodationist who wants to sort of appear reasonable to a room full of governors. Talking, by the way, to his governor, Governor Stitt, who's one of the worst sellout Republicans in all of America. It's appalling that the great patriots of Oklahoma, an amazing state, full of some of the most hardworking, intense, God-fearing, America-loving patriots in this country, that they're represented by people like Stitt and Markwayne Mullin and Lankford. We've got to fix that. These red states should have fire breathers, not eunuchs like these folks. But getting back to Mullin, he needs to recognize the state that the country is in right now and his position in it now that he is DHS secretary. And we don't want to hear him talking about how Haitians should reapply while they're here before they get punted from the United States so that they can stay permanently. We don't want to hear that nonsense from him. We don't want to hear him, as he said in an interview, promising big city mayors. He promised them that, hey, if you just give us your absolute worst guys, we'll leave you alone. He said you won't see ICE in your communities. That is not what America First voted for. That's not what America voted for in 2024. Donald Trump won the popular vote with his foundational promise being mass deportations. And we need to continue to follow through on that. We have to a degree, but it's got to be ratcheted up. And getting back to the economy and affordability, the quickest route back to affordability is getting the illegals out of here. Why? Because A, it raises Americans' wages. B, it depresses that artificial demand for housing, goods, and services from the illegals. The Dallas Federal Reserve, not exactly a rabid right-wing organization, the Fed down in Texas told us 30% of the increase in housing prices comes from illegals. We remove those illegals, we get back to a place of affordability, and really quickly.
Yeah. No, just before, I'm going to hold you through the break. Just repeat that from the Dallas Fed, their assessment of things.
The Dallas Fed, 30% of the increase in housing prices in the United States has come from illegals.
Here's the requirement they ought to have over at DHS. Start with must have 3-digit IQ. Okay, must have 3-digit IQ. We don't need Kung Fu Plumber right now. We need an attack dog who's smart and tough. We're going to take a short commercial break. We got John Solomon with, quite frankly, a stunning revelation about the FBI. Steve's going to stick with us. We're going to talk about my interview with the Secretary of Treasury yesterday, also his Squawk Box, about what's really happening with the American economy and how we are moving forward. Garland Favorito, Lara Logan, packed this morning on a Wednesday. Short commercial break. Back in a moment.
So Michigan results at the voter level, older and sensible Dems, they don't wholly embrace this lurch to the left. But this is important. Just calling these candidates Marxists and Jihadis, that's insufficient. Now, we should accurately label them. That's what they are. But we must also provide the affirmative agenda for broad prosperity from the patriotic populist right. And it centers on protecting American wages and workers through immigration control. It also protects American industries, the kinds that have dominated Michigan for generations, through the smart trade agenda of America First. Now, we do that into November. And the reasonable Dems who rejected Abdul, they'll stay home or they'll come over to Rogers. And then we win in Michigan, but only if our base is activated as well. See my article for the roadmap.
Okay, let's get that up. We got to, by the way, the engine room is telling me in Arizona the same exact thing, 30% increases because of illegal aliens bidding up rents. This is the, you want affordability, you want to attack affordability, ship them home, deport them all. That's the way you get affordability. I might also add in Michigan, $70 million spent against the Marxist jihadists. I think $30 million from AIPAC. I'm not saying it's AIPAC's Waterloo, but they threw everything they could into this and still lost. So I think this whole thing of AIPAC's money in these elections has got to be, no Republican should be taking any AIPAC money right now at all. It's going to be a campaign issue. Just like data centers, these are the issues that are right below the surface, that are bubbling up to the surface. Steve, let's talk about the not dealing with immigration as toughly as we have, because just not bad hombres, and the economy. Scott Bessent was on Squawk yesterday. He came on here, particularly in manufacturing. There's a lot of good things that are happening. We got obviously off course with the little excursion in Iran that hopefully we're somehow bringing to a close here over this next week. Your thoughts right now underpinning the economy, because That's what you're going to have to sell people. The people, working class
Right.
people, see that something's actually being done. One way to show working class people something be done, have mass deportations of illegal aliens and stop these phony immigration policies, these quote unquote phony scam for the donor class legal that allows working class people to be crushed, the middle class to be crushed, kids coming out of college don't have a shot to have a job. STEM workers done everything right all their lives in college, in school to get great grades, can't get a job. It's enough already. Put America, how about this simply? America first and America citizens first. No need to be protecting Qatar, who's paying underwriting the Islamic invasion of Dearborn, Michigan, and also the great state of Texas. Steve Cortes.
Yeah, amen to all of that. So yes, we flood American universities with hundreds of thousands of foreign students, including about 300,000 from China, from our existential enemy. We are supporting all of these schools. Those foreign students, I think a lot of folks don't know this, are then allowed to stay for at least a year, in many cases 3 years, as legal workers under OPT, taking jobs away that should be going to young Americans. Many of them also then transitioned into H-1B and eventually transitioned into being American citizens. Enough of this nonsense, of this ruse that rewards the oligarchs but punishes American citizens. And you're right, though, getting specific and near term back to this campaign into November, mass deportations need to accelerate, and I would argue for a concentration on worksite raids, because that's where you're going to connect these two issues of affordability, pay for Americans, with mass deportations. Because when these work sites get raided, guess what? They don't just shut down. They hire Americans, and they might have to pay more money, and the profit margins of some of those greedy owners might shrink a bit. But the point is, it's what Americans voted for. It's what Americans deserve. And it addresses directly, it's a silver bullet right at the affordability issue. But to your point too about Michigan, I think this is really important for us to note. That a mountain of money was spent against Abdul. So let's not take him lightly. Even though he barely won, even though he's very arrogant, very cocky, and he barely won this race, he still has a lot of media skills. He does have some of that media charisma of Mamdani. So let's take him really seriously. And we absolutely should call him what he is. Okay, he is a Marxist jihadist. But at the same time, that's insufficient. We can't stop there. And we have to realize, too, there's a lot of Americans, especially younger ones, for whom Marxism doesn't mean that much. They simply don't have the civics education to say, Marxism is terrible. So what do we need to do? Present the affirmative case then for prosperity. And to that point, you mentioned that Secretary Bennett, who's just doing a fantastic job, Secretary Besson talked about the manufacturing resurgence that is going on. Now, it's sort of quietly happening in this country, but there is a massive reshoring, onshoring back to the United States. The Trump trade agenda is absolutely working, both carrot and stick, to get manufacturing back into this country. So we do have the beginnings of a real manufacturing boom in this country. The reason people don't feel it right now, though, is because affordability is front and center in their lives, and that is primarily because of the war that spiked prices. So if we are near a pause, or let's hope an end to the war, and I think we are relatively near, I'm not being Pollyanna, but I think we're getting there. If we end this war soon, and I mean really, really soon, get prices back to a responsible place, then combined with the boom in manufacturing, which is already unfolding, and throw in mass deportations, we can be in a really different place in 3 months, Steve. 3 months in politics, as you well know, you took over the Trump campaign in 2016, I think with less than 3 months to go, and pulled off a miracle along with Donald Trump. It's a lot of time for us to work and to chop wood, and all of that can happen, particularly if we get a peaceful resolution, or at least a pause. And by the way, as my proof of that it's not just my opinion, I do a lot of poll every month. The best poll President Trump has had all year was during that pause we had in June. If you remember, for about 4 weeks, things were really calm, at least relatively calm, in the Middle East, in the Gulf. Trump's numbers leapt forward for my polling during that time period. Once we started fighting again, they unfortunately reverted back to mean. But it proved, I think, that June polling, that if we get a period of peace here, we get prices back to a reasonable place, the economic trajectory pre-war was actually quite good. We can return to that and make our case in time for November. You add to that some really radical, untenable candidates on the left who even a lot of Democrats reject, as we saw last night. And there is a path to victory for us. Now, it's a narrow path. It's a hard one, but there is a path.
where people go for the polling, the investigative reports, the films, your Twitter, all of it, sir?
Yeah, please go to CortesInvestigates.com. My newest article is up on inflation and affordability at Daily Signal. And my Twitter is at Cortes Steve, Cortes with an S at the end. Thank you so much, Steve.
Love the Daily Signal. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. Great analysis.
Thank you.
John Solomon. Wow. And please tell me half the FBI is, this is not about bad apples, brother. You have unveiled something that is systemic in nature. Talk to us about what is coming out today, sir.
And by the way, this is going to be about an 8 or 10 day roll now, Steve, where every day we're going to put out something significant as we get it declassified. But the big picture is you have an FBI investigating things against Donald Trump they know not to be true. And then they fail to prosecute things that they prove are criminal. You're going to see two things occur. That dual system of justice will be laid bare. And people will say, well, John, at this point, why does it matter? You've been writing this for 10 years. What we're doing, what we're laying out in your show right now, Steve, are overt acts that Joe DeGenova can build into his grand conspiracy case that is now underway. Agents and other witnesses have been hauled before the grand jury in the last few weeks. There's some cooperating witnesses coming forward based on my reporting. These are overt acts. And so today's document is an investigation we previously did not know exist. It was called Oxford Comma. And it was an investigation predicated on the notion that Donald Trump was acting as a Russian agent. He was acting at Vladimir Putin's behest when he fired James Comey for screwing up the Hillary Clinton email case. You just have to let that sink in, because that's literally what the FBI's predicated investigation states. Now, they do this in May of 2017. At the time they do it, in the very week they do it, where they're saying, we have proof Donald Trump's a Russian stooge, and that's why he fired James Comey. Pete Strzok is texting his girlfriend, there's no big there on Russia collusion. An agent named Barnett, Bill Barnett, has told the FBI there is no evidence of collusion. He worked the Mike Flynn case. The FBI has cleared Mike Flynn of collusion. The FBI has built a spreadsheet showing that every line of the Steele dossier, which is the reason the FBI believed collusion, has been debunked or shown to be internet rumor only. Steele's primary subsource has already done an FBI interview saying, I didn't mean any of that stuff. That was bar talk. That was rumors. I didn't know I was being treated as a source. That's not source-worthy material. And the CIA has told the FBI, oh, Hillary Clinton was behind that whole false Russia narrative. And that guy you've been looking at named Carter Page, he's our guy, a CIA asset. In May of 2017, the FBI had no evidence. In fact, it had plenty of evidence to the contrary, that Donald Trump was not a Russian spy, and yet they opened up a criminal investigation claiming that Donald Trump is a Russian stooge who fired James Comey to carry out Vladimir Putin's orders.
Hang on. Slow down.
Yeah.
There's one thing about Crossfire Hurricane, and, Trump was a candidate and we were running a campaign, all that. And as horrible as that is, this is a sitting president of the United States. May of 17, I think, was our 4th or 5th month in office. You're telling me that the commander-in-chief of the American Armed Forces had an investigation started by the FBI, and senior officials of the FBI knew about it, that let's forget for the second the people said it's all phony and you can't do that. How could you possibly even commence it if you don't have information without senior members of the Justice Department and maybe other people in the government, the CIA, at least going and running it by him? You're starting an investigation of the president of the United States saying, here's our theory of the case. He is a Russian agent. Guilty of treason at the highest levels, in cahoots with Putin. How possibly, this is science fiction, how possibly could that happen without other members of the senior members of the government approving? And this is why I say it's just not bad apples. This is they're institutionally. How could you do this, sir?
Yeah. The people who approved this were working directly for that commander-in-chief. The people who wrote the memo are James Baker, then the FBI general counsel, and then Bill Priestap, then the counterintelligence chief for the FBI, Pete Strzok's boss. The people it is sent to for approval are Rod Rosenstein, the acting attorney general for all things Russia, the deputy attorney general for everybody else, and the acting FBI director, Andrew McCabe, who takes over for James Comey after James Comey's fired. Now, let's go through that chain, because once that referral is made, once Oxford referral is sent to Rosenstein and McCabe, the next day, Robert Mueller is named a special counsel. Rod Rosenstein names a special counsel to investigate the possibility that Donald Trump engaged in obstruction of justice as a Russian agent because he fired James Comey. Now, you have to pause there. That in and of itself is an amazing string of events. But we have to add something to it that maybe our readers and our viewers have forgotten. Rod Rosenstein is the person who fired James Comey. He wrote the firing memo. He knows at that time, when he takes Oxford, and upsizes it to Bob Mueller, that they didn't fire James Comey because of the Russia collusion case. They fired James Comey because he violated department rules when he closed down the Hillary Clinton email case. The man upsizing this is the man that knows it's not true. And that's how Bob Mueller was given birth.
Stick around. I got to keep you for one more segment. This is making my head blow up. Solomon on the other side.
We will fight till they're all gone. We rejoice when there's no more. Let's take down the CCP.
Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
I mean, this whole thing so stinks. Now you know why. Remember John Solomon when right around the 24 election when we won, McCabe, who's still a contributor, a paid contributor to CNN. He's over there whining on CNN, going, we're having deep discussions in my family about whether we actually move overseas, right, to get away. Of course he is. Now you know it. Where's his indictment? Where's his perp walk? Where are all the perp walks in these guys? This has been years in the making. Everything, and by the way, everything you said right. And Rod Rosenstein, remember Sessions recused himself. Rod Rosenstein, who kind of nobody wanted but was jammed in there, that you needed, a deputy, you needed a DAG that knew what he was doing. Isn't this the guy that also wore a wire or was talking about wearing a wire into the Oval Office? Yeah. And knowing what he knew about why Comey was fired, didn't he talk about wearing a wire into the Oval Office to get the president? They thought the president was a Russian agent. All of these guys we would go after all of them for treason right now. They went after Donald Trump in May of 2017, folks. This has nothing to do with him being a candidate. They thought 4 months in office, 5 months in office, he was an agent of Putin. That alone ought to all be put on trial for treason right now, indicted for treason right now, sir.
And more importantly, the people working for these decision makers, the agents working for Priestap and Strzok and McCabe and Rosenstein, they were all telling the FBI there's no there. Pete Strzok himself tells his girlfriend in a text message, the very week they opened Oxford, no big there. Agent Barnett, the guy who worked a big part of this case, told the Justice Department at some point, I was watching a bad game of Clue. You two put people in a room on a game board and say, that must be collusion because they were in the same room. The agents who worked this case were laughing at how hysterically stupid the people managing them were and what they were doing to politically prevent this president from being successful. This is an overt act that Joe DeGenova can introduce in a conspiracy case saying there was a 10-year conspiracy to violate Donald Trump's civil liberties by launching investigations with false predicates. By the way, several lawyers have called me since I put this up on the White House this morning. All of them said, John, it's clear cut. You predicate a case and you know the predication is false. You have acted illegally under the color of law. Joe DeGenova has a new potential overt act to build his conspiracy case. We've got many others. We've been talking them on your show for years, but this is a new one, slam dunk, according to the lawyers who've looked at the documents.
You talk about the weaponization fund. Everybody got rolled up into the Mueller thing with millions of dollars illegal. It's outrageous.
Yep.
Are we going to go, or do you see a path here to indictments and perp walks and Cash? How about just letting go today, sending out an email? Half of the FBI just goes home permanently. Your thoughts, John Solomon?
Listen, I'm gonna take my hat off as the chairman of the White House Task Force. That's what I was talking about in these documents. I'm going to go back to being a reporter for a second. I do not know this information from anything I've gained in government. I can tell you with 100% certainty that Republicans are obstructing the investigation into weaponization. There are two Republicans I can name by name, Senator John Thune and Senator Tom Cotton. They have refused for months now. The first request came in late January, early February. They are refusing thus far to provide to Joe DeGenova, to the prosecutors in Florida, to the Miami U.S. Attorney, to the Justice Department, the transcripts of John Brennan's interviews with the Senate Intelligence Committee. They have refused to do so. I'm going to call out a third name because I don't understand the Justice Department's behavior. When a body that's separate of the executive branch doesn't comply, every other time in American history, go back to Iran-Contra, go back to Watergate, the Justice Department subpoenas the Congress. For some reason, the acting Attorney General, who wants to be the permanent Attorney General, has not authorized a subpoena to the United States Senate to get those documents. Those documents will allow the prosecutors in Miami to decide whether the charges are warranted against John Brennan. The idea that Republican senators will not cooperate with the Republican administration is ridiculous politically, but it's illegal. It's obstruction. There ought to be a grand jury subpoena sitting in the Senate clerk's office, and there ought to be a court case yesterday compelling this because the Justice Department has been delayed by 8 months by two Republican senators who have the responsibility and the ability to deliver this. You want to get to the grand conspiracy case, you need the missing evidence, and the Senate possesses it. And as of this date, I can find no evidence they've turned it over, and there is no grand jury subpoena because the clerk of the Senate would have to report it publicly. I just checked the congressional record again today. So Todd Blanche, Tom Cotton, John Thune, you got some explaining to do to the War Room posse, I think.
Do you think Todd is being held up because it's almost like blackmail? They won't vote for him for confirmation if he forces the issue here to turn this over. I mean, Tom Cotton's the senator, not from Arkansas. He's the senator from the deep state. That's who he represents, the deep state. You know it. I know. Everybody in D.C. knows it. You can understand. And Thune, this is once again, while we must have the Save America Act, he just thumbed his nose at the president. Now they're talking about a CR that's going to basically institutionalize the $2 trillion of deficits every year. That's what Thune and the donor class are worried about. They're not worried about this, John. They don't. This is my point. They don't put priorities on what the people that support President Trump the most and the grassroots leaders and the grassroots warriors that go door to door. This is what they want to see. This is a super high priority for them, and it just gets laughed off, sir.
Listen, all I know is that the Attorney General has the power to do this. Other Attorney Generals have done it in history. Watergate, Iran-Contra, Whitewater. The President is the leader of the free world. Todd Blanche, Kash Patel, Joe DeGenova, report to him. He has a good question to ask him today. My reporting has authenticated this. They ought to do their job and get this evidence and let the American people know where the crimes were committed. Tomorrow we'll be able to come on your show and show you the other side of this. While you go after Donald Trump without evidence, you protect people who did things that Democrats don't want out. You're going to see the flip side of this wash, rinse, repeat cycle tomorrow. We'll come back and tell you about it tomorrow.
John Solomon, in the interim, where do people go to get all this information, sir?
Yep, WhiteHouse.gov has a wonderful display. They even let me publish a story on the White House site. I've never done that before. That's a new hallmark of my career. Jay Solomon reports on social media. We'll be talking about this after your show tonight at 6 o'clock on Just the News No Noise right here on Real America's Voice.
Stick around. The president's got a speech at 4:30 our time. Eric Bolling will do a handoff, cover the speech in its entirety, and then we'll pitch to Amanda Head and John Solomon. Just the News. So it'll be another blockbuster show. Take your phone out. Text Bannon, Bannon. That would be your humble servant. 989898. Get from Birch Gold, the ultimate guide for investing in gold and precious metals in an age of turbulence. The era and age of Donald J. Trump, the disruptor. Short break.